Doug Greenberg, welcome to the
Sir.
podcast.
Yes, it's great being here. Thank you for inviting me on. I've been looking forward to this ever since I heard you had a Mel Gibson podcast going on. I said I got to get in on this.
Oh, I built this just to chat with you guys.
Oh yeah,
I don't care who listens. I just need a playground to play with my buddies.
and you took a very polarizing character to do it with.
Well, I'm a very polarizing character myself. So
Some would say
it makes perfect sense.
Some would definitely say that you are a polarizing character, but we love you for it.
Well, somebody has to. We can't all blow smoke up each other's ass.
We didn't know how much was like lost in translation from what's your native tongue? Dutch?
Yeah, I'm Dutch.
Dutch
And
to
my native
to
tongue
English.
is also Dutch.
So so we didn't know how much would be lost in translation with I don't know. I guess it would seem to be trolling that what you do, but it's we know it's all in good fun.
Oh, definitely. It's also trolling because trolling is fun.
Yeah. I always I don't know. Anytime you fired back at something, I always like laughed at it because I think we're of the same ilk. But some people definitely take it to heart. They don't belong on the internet if that's the case.
You can't be too sensitive about this stuff.
For real. Agree 100%.
But this is the age of sensitivity.
Okay, that is true.
This is the age of words hurt.
Words hurt.
Unlike the
safe
Middle
place.
Ages, where spears and swords and axes hurt.
Now that, my friend, is a segue. That's beautiful.
Now, Doug, welcome to the podcast. You picked Braveheart. Why?
Why? Why did I pick Braveheart? I mean, this movie came out in 95, but I don't think I saw it till maybe a couple years later. But this movie really started my love for like epic adventure movies. It's the landscapes, the score, James Horner. Oh my God.
Yeah,
just like the grand scope of the story as a whole, as I'm sure we're going to cover a lot of it, as historically inaccurate as it may be.
Yes. I plan to do a little cleanup in a minute or so.
That's what you're here for. But just the scope of the story, I'm somewhat of a history buff myself,
Mhm.
but at the time, thinking that this was like a historically factual at the time, I'm like, wow, what a story. I can't believe, hundreds of years later, it's just being told, but it was
Little did you know you were just watching Scottish propaganda.
yeah. I'm sure they take it harder than we do. Like I said, it's a big epic,
So were you a fan of Mel's before Braveheart? Or did Braveheart convince you?
No, I grew up with like the Lethal Weapons, the stuff that he did prior to this, mainly the Lethal Weapons, but I thought always thought he was a great actor. This convinced me a little bit less because of his ridiculous Scottish accent that he does. I was able to look past it. A lot of these things, even the historical inaccuracies that we're going to cover, I'm able to look past and just enjoy what was put out there.
Well, the thing with Mel is he's American, but he moved to Australia.
Mm-hmm.
In Mad Max, he has a really thick Australian accent. It's not an accident. I mean, if you go into any country in your formative years, the street language will influence you. So, of course, he's very colloquially Australian. I think he still is. Acting in a different accent isn't much of a thing for him. It's still a Hollywood accent, but it's fairly believable.
Okay, maybe we're seeing the Mel Gibson that we know as like an American actor doing a Scottish accent that you're like, okay.
Yeah, that's how I see it. But
yeah. But I mean, growing up in Australia, being around it, I'm sure he picked up the accent pretty, but he must have had like a vocal coach or whatever they call them.
Don't they always?
to help him.
I mean, if you look at movies out of Hollywood from the last 20 years, it's mostly British actors.
Yeah.
So all of them have like American voice coaches to make their British more Americanized.
And
some which is crazy when you think about it.
It is. I know, like instead of just hiring American actors, or you'll hire an American to do a British accent.
They're all too fat now. You can't hire Americans anymore. They're all on McDonald's diet. So you need like these thin, reedy British people.
Yep. There we go. American
with nice aquiline faces.
Yeah. Well, when you're right. I can't argue with that.
Let's do some cleanup.
Okay.
So Braveheart was written by a guy named Randall Wallace, a name you'll hear more often when you're looking at Mel Gibson movies, because he was also the director for We Were Soldiers, which is kind of interesting. They switched places because Mel directed Braveheart. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Wallace was on vacation in Scotland, and American goes to Europe look up ancestors. And so he was in Scotland, and he was in his castle, and he's looking at the pretty castle, and there's like statues of William Wallace everywhere. So who's this guy? He asked the guy. And he's like, oh, that's William Wallace. That's our national hero, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, well, my name is Wallace. When you're a writer, your interest is piqued. So he started researching the whole thing. Here's something I took a deep dive in. There's a poem, a 15th century poem about William Wallace by a dude named Blind Harry, aka Henry the Minstrel, aka Harold the Minstrel, etc. He goes by various names, and minstrels were common in that age. Nobility would hire them to sing their praises, etc. Mm-hmm. Blind Harry basically tells the story of William Wallace, and he does this almost 200 years later, because William Wallace is from around 1300. And this was written in the 1480, something like that.
Right.
And a couple of things. William Wallace isn't Scottish. The name says it. I cross-checked everything. William Wallace is Welsh, which explains his deep-seated hatred for the British, or the English, I should say, because the English had just usurped Wales. And Wales is really the original British country. It's like the last vestige of the Celts. And that's why the Welsh have a different language. They are still close to the original Celtish culture.
Wow.
The last
I'm known as the research guy, and I didn't even come across any of this. This is
Wallace, Welsh. So he's basically from Wales. Mm-hmm. It's been said he's like a land noble, which is interesting. A land noble from Wales in Scotland. So how respected is his family? Well, it isn't, obviously. Of course, the poem is heroic. And like any heroic poem, the hero is awesome and perfect and beautiful. The real
and usually of lower stature too, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, there was no Scotland. It was just clans. It was just like these hamlets and castles, and every glen would have basically an extended family, which would form a clan, and all the males would basically defend the land based on clanmanship. And they had a kind of feudal system, and so they had their allegiances. So there were like leading families, but they were all contesting each other, and they had been for centuries. And the irony of the situation we find ourselves in 1280 is that Scotland has been relatively at peace for the first time in its history. Their king dies, and he doesn't have an heir. So the Scottish nobles are all jockeying for position. You see some of it in the movie. The way Mel tells it is they pretty much amalgamated Scottish history and Scottish politics because it was just way too complicated to explain in a movie like this, which really makes sense. And, I complain about how they treat history, but you have to be cinematographically, that's not a good word. For the film, you have to be conscious of storytelling, and you can't be too complicated about this stuff. Mm-hmm. So, historical figure William Wallace isn't Scottish. Longshanks, who is depicted as the horrible villain, is one of the most respected kings of England. I mean, he did a lot. Painted as the bad guy with his prima nocta stuff, which didn't happen in real life. There was no prima nocta in England or in Scotland at that time, maybe eons. Anywho,
and in France was the only place I saw that was ever invoked anyway.
Yeah, it's a French thing. Yeah, which that makes sense. Which if you know French people, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Just if you doubt this, just look into the whole DSK scandal.
Mhm.
That happened in your neck of the woods, in fact. You heard
The
about
what
this?
scandal?
Okay, so there's this French politician who was slated to become the next president of France. He was in his hotel in New York, and he raped a maid.
Hmm.
Yeah, and this became a scandal, and this cost him the presidency because
Wow.
after this became news, of course, his political opponents would exploit it, but also a lot of women in France stood up and said, "Hey, this guy, lured me. I was a journalist, and he lured me to his little office in the city, and it turned out to be there was just a bed there, and he tried to rape me, and I had to run away half naked." And well, there you go. French leaders just kind of love their prima nocte.
It's ingrained in their, genetic.
Yeah, there's actually in Braveheart as well. There are a lot of French connections because William Wallace, after he left England, after he was defeated, toured Europe. Basically to gain support for the Scottish cause. He went to Rome, and he also went to France because he figured the French hate the English, and he had really bad timing. Longshanks had just married, I think, the sister of the French king, and that was a good marriage, and so they were on great terms. So the French king basically imprisoned Wallace, wrote his brother-in-law and said, look what I have a gift for you. I caught this guy. And Edward was like unconcerned. He was like, don't worry about it. Just let him go. And
no kidding.
And so this is actual history. This is cross-checked because the French court, they kept accurate records, whereas most records in the Middle Ages are fairly spotty, and a lot of it is just really hard to track because the only people who could write were monks, pretty much, and some nobility, because you had to learn letters so you could write battle orders.
Right. So some of the history got lost along the way.
Yeah, well, most history is just useless to nobility and the papacy because they only use history to further their ends.
Yeah.
Why would you complex records of everything?
Right.
Doesn't suit.
No, right. Especially some of the horrors that have been done throughout history. I'm sure those
and are depicted in the movie, which makes the movie so good, doesn't it?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So Longshanks wasn't a pagan. His son was indeed an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
He really was. His wife was as influential as is suggested in the movie. She had sons by him. And at some point after Edward II came to the throne, they actually deposed him with help of some nobles because everybody was just sick of him because he kept losing battles. And he had there's rumors about this Galveston guy. You see in the movie how he's thrown out the window.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they took a lot of tidbits from history and they sort of remixed it to make a cool movie. That's pretty much what happened.
Well, you're talking about, in a history that covers, 2,000 years.
Yeah.
You're talking about a 12-year period where Isabella, or 20-year period where Isabella was only 5 years old when the events of Braveheart happened. So she wasn't married to the king's son at that time.
Nope.
That didn't happen until years after Wallace was already dead.
Oh, they screwed up the timeline completely.
Yeah, yeah.
But that doesn't matter because it's a cool movie.
No.
That's the way you should view it. And in the end, history, it's not written by the victors. History is written by historians. Mm-hmm. And they never agree on anything. So, who knows? Maybe 6 months from now, maybe 6 years from now, maybe 60 years from now, someone will dig something up or find something in a book that will explain everything about who William Wallace was and what exactly his part in history was. Wallace is presumed to have been an outlaw when the revolt broke out. There are some clues that suggest that his wife at the time was indeed murdered by the sheriff and that he started that revolt as a revenge killing. It could have happened. So, hey, why not put it in a movie? Makes for great cinema. So he wins the first battle, but he did not win that alone. There was this other rebel called Murray, and he got killed during the battle. So Wallace was the only one left standing. So he pretty much reaped all the rewards. They made him the protector of Scotland, etc. He did lose the second battle, and that pretty much cost him his reputation because they pinned all their hopes on him. He won. Yeah, he won Stirling. Went all in. And there's actually the way they filmed it is again a mixture of whole bunch of battles because they wanted to make it interesting, which makes perfect sense because if you look at the actual Stirling battle, the Battle of Stirling is really a massacre of British knights who made a huge tactical mistake.
It's also called the Battle of Stirling Bridge.
Exactly. And they got killed on the bridge.
It was a smart kind of maneuver by the Scots because the English had to cross a bridge and they can only do it like 3 men abreast. So the Scots were just waiting on the other side and killed 3 at a time. And
come to my axe.
Until the English turned tail and fled.
And Falkirk, of course, was a different story, but it's not the story as depicted in the movie. Arguably, there were no Irish there. Could have been, but there's no evidence of that. And this was the first actual use of the Welsh bowman, the mightiest weapon of the Middle Ages. Now, Wales had just been usurped by England. So this was like Longshank's little secret. He unleashed the Welsh bowmen, which are, if you look at the history and if you look at their effectiveness, you had your bowmen and then you had the Welsh bowmen, who were like these huge muscular guys with like really, really, really heavy bows. Now you're a Stallone guy. So you've seen Rambo 4, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Now, Stallone had a 50-pound bow in that. And he switched to a 35-pound bow because he had a lot of close-ups where he had to like hold the bow for a very protracted period of time. And it was just too heavy.
No kidding.
Now,
the bow itself weighed 50 pounds?
No, the drawing strength takes 50 pounds.
Okay.
The bows of the Welsh bowmen were 3 times what a normal, regular hunting bow now is. Those guys were powerful. Those were not wimps. They were huge guys. They were muscular, strapping dudes. So you see these little bowmen depicted in the battle. At some point, that's, I think, the Stirling battle. And at some point, you see the Scottish cavalry ride in on them. In reality, that would never happen because that was Scottish light cavalry. The Welsh bowmen would have just cut them down because that's what they did to French knights. If you like look at the battles in the 100-Year War between Britain and France, the Welsh bowmen were hated, and they were hated because they were so effective. Because that's what the 2-finger salute stands for. That's basically the salute the Welsh bowmen would make when the French knights would jeer at them, because they were basically, the French knights would always threaten Welsh bowmen saying, we're going to cut your fingers off. And that'll be the end of your little career, because those were career soldiers. So those 2 fingers are the drawing fingers of the bow. And pointing those fingers at someone basically says to that person, I can still kill you.
That's amazing. That's I didn't deep dive into the bowman either.
I didn't have to. I traveled Great Britain. They're always happy to tell you that.
No kidding.
In the movie, he's betrayed by Scottish nobles. Mm-hmm. It's suggested that he's actually betrayed by his best friend in history. He had a bunch of people around him. Of course, they've been trying to get him for almost a decade. He'd been out being a rebel for 7 years. It's rumored that someone in his own camp betrayed him.
Like Robert the Bruce betrayed William Wallace, but it was another Scottish noble. I'm looking for the name and I can't find it right now.
Yes, again, that is disputed.
It's disputed that
it's disputed. But Robert the Bruce was a contemporary, was much like Wallace. And interestingly enough, in the movie, he's a very pretty man. He's a handsome actor. And his father is disfigured and ugly and disgusting and looks like a leper. According to record, it was Robert the Bruce who had a skin problem.
I know he suffered from leprosy later on in life. I don't know.
It was the Middle Ages.
Yeah. That was I don't know if that's what killed him, but I mean, leprosy is one of those things where you treat somebody like a leper. You treat them like, you don't want to go near that person because
they're highly contagious.
That terrible disease.
Well, it's kind of like in Ben-Hur where they have like this little leprosy island. That's fairly realistic. I mean, that's basically quarantining a bunch of people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now you got COVID, you're treated as a leper.
If you get COVID, if you're unvaccinated.
Oh, that's what it is.
That's exactly what
it is. But Robert the Bruce, from what I read, was the term Braveheart for the movie's sake, is referred to. It refers to William Wallace, but the real Braveheart of Scotland was Robert the Bruce.
Yeah, he's the narrator of the movie. Now, if you want to dive into history, in the movie, you have pikemen make large spears to fight the heavy cavalry.
Right.
Now, the best heavy cavalry in the world were the French knights. The Flemish had bested the French knights already. And guess what the specialty of Flanders was?
Pikemen.
Pikemen.
So William Wallace didn't come up with the idea of making spears.
Of course he didn't.
As long as a man.
Well, of course he didn't. But pikemen had been around for a couple of centuries. So
sure.
It was in a period where it was like close to the Renaissance. So there were obviously already old Roman and Greek manuscripts making the rounds, and people were gleaning it for military science. I mean, most of the castle building in the Middle Ages is based on Roman masonry and Roman technology that they improved on.
Before the years of firearms, I mean, when you had these combats, like everything was close quarter. So obviously big animals like horses would win the day. So you had to, until, like you're talking about bowmen before, like that was a distance weapon. You needed to, you don't have guns to keep the horsemen at bay, to keep the cavalry at bay.
And the Welsh bowmen were so effective because they would cut through armor, and they would cut through the armor of the horses.
Wow.
They were very powerful bows. And of course, they had a technological advantage. And whenever there's a technological advantage, you win the battle.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
It made up for numbers.
Yeah, history doesn't lie.
The one thing they got right, unfortunately, they didn't really show the court case, because they actually had a drummed up court where they accused him of all kinds of stuff and saying he betrayed the English king. And I'm able to cross-check this because there's a record of this. Wallace at some point said, "Look, I didn't betray the king. He was never my king."
Mm-hmm.
And that
was actually said, right?
Yes. That's
factual.
The entire movie has a narrative about freedom, has a narrative about nobles are here to serve the people, not to give the nobles their position. It's revisionist because I don't think people actually thought that way in that time.
Here it is. You think the people of this country exist to provide you with position. I think your position exists to provide those people with freedom.
Great words written by an American.
Yeah. I know, who could come up with that off the top of their head, but it's I mean, it's if you think about it like that, this movie is full of like great monologues.
It's really well written.
Yeah.
You can say what you want. You can complain about the history, but if we just let that, I'm okay with the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And Mel himself never claimed it was historical.
Right.
If you, that's one of the reasons buying the DVD is so much fun. If you get it with director's commentaries, you can hear Mel talk about it saying, "Oh yeah, I did this out of artistic license. I did that because of a whim. I did that because I needed a stronger villain." Those were a director's choices to make a good movie, to tell a good story, and he does that. And that's what's so amazing about Braveheart. It's for a guy who's never directed a movie like that before. I mean, this was his second movie he directed, and the first one was really small. Incredible accomplishment.
Yeah, and maybe it's because neither of us have any stake in the game because we're not Scottish. Maybe the people of Scotland have a greater pride in their small country. That's why they take umbrage to this movie as being historically inaccurate. If you look at it, like name one true story that we see in the movies that's really like beginning to end factually accurate. There's no skew in the timeline. There's no skew in the details. Like everything is changed to some point because you want to make it interesting. Nobody's life is that interesting that you're going to capture the most exciting part of it in a 3-hour movie, without changing a few things, without fudging a few things.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just impossible to film.
That's true also. You got to deal with the resources that you have available to you.
That and half the time you're pressed for time, pressed for money, like you said, resources, manpower. I understand during the filming they didn't shoot certain scenes just because everybody was tired. And they show this hunt. Someone makes an attempt on the life of William Wallace, and the Irish guy saves him.
Yeah,
that was supposed to be at night, but it would have been even colder. And they shot everything outside. It's amazing when you think about it. I mean, have you been to Scotland?
I've never been to Europe.
I hope you make it out there because it's beautiful. But there's one thing, especially up north, the weather is a little challenging. During principal photography, they picked like the worst place you could possibly shoot, where it rains
all the time.
It rains incessantly, and you actually see it in the movie. It's like the rain is a character in the movie, really, because it's always pouring and pissing down, and everybody just looks miserable. Because if you're in the rain long enough, you become miserable. Let's face facts here.
I can imagine. I don't know how people live in Seattle, where it rains constant. Rains 9 months out of the year there.
Hey, they didn't rebel for nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, that was that in Scotland? Because I know most of the outdoor stuff was filmed in Ireland.
Yeah, Ireland and Scotland. Yeah. They probably, for the battles, they relocated simply because they used the Irish army to have extras for all the battle scenes.
Right.
2,000 extras.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Unbelievable.
Because I was an extra in Dunkirk, which was pretty much similar in size, and that's a military operation. That's just enormous.
Yeah.
That's basically, if you watch the documentary on Braveheart, it was pretty much similar to my experience, where you just you're bussed in and you go through wardrobe and you go through makeup, and it's like this big factory. And basically, you go in as a civilian and you come out as, in their case, either a British knight or a Scottish warrior.
Yeah, wow.
And in our case, it was just we would olive drab and with those piss pot helmets on, and we just stand in the water for the entire day.
Wow, that's a pretty cool experience.
It was. Although when I look at the movie, it's like, okay, what scene am I supposed to be in? And it's like, theoretically, I'm like the fifth row, third of the right, the guy in the helmet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You can say you were in it, though.
Yeah, well, it's being in an American movie is still on my bucket list, because I don't think that one counts.
No. Hey, man, I'd count it, but kudos to you.
I hope to improve on it.
That's pretty cool.
So before you saw Braveheart, did you have any knowledge? Because you're a history buff. Did you have any knowledge of Scottish history and of William Wallace particularly?
Actually, no, not at all. And when any interest that I ever had in history was really more American history. But I always found things like from the medieval times to be exciting to see, because I mean, that's just a world that we can't even comprehend. Nothing, no necessities of life, nothing that makes our life easier now existed back then. So I seeing a movie like that, I think, how did these people ever survive without, a flashlight or, air conditioning?
Last time I visited Edinburgh, I went to several museums, and one of them is where you visit the Edinburgh Underground, the medieval underground, because the best places to live, kind of like the high-rise apartment buildings of Edinburgh, would be the subterranean spaces, and they would go down stories and stories and stories upon stories into the ground, and there's an entire subterranean city.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the fun part about a tour is it's not just guided, but it also it has screens everywhere with actors depicting how people would live in that time.
Yeah,
it's an amazing place.
Wow.
When you visit Edinburgh, and you will at some point, simply because it's too beautiful to ignore.
Yeah. Well, it's on my list, man. I've this movie actually not an interest to where I like researched a ton of history about Scotland, but I always felt like I wanted to go visit, that part of Europe, like Scotland, and Ireland.
I wanted to go because of Highlander.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. After I saw Highlander, it's like, I want to go to Scotland.
That's cool.
I mean, because of the beauty, because of the culture, because people were chopping each other's heads off. It seemed like a fun place. And the first time I went there, it was crazy. It was so much fun.
Minus the chopping the heads off them.
Yeah, no, it's basically just they still punch you, but there are no more axes, so that's good.
Oh, I mean, it's kind of refreshing in a way, I guess.
Yeah, and that's also in the movie, the Highland Games. I mean, they show some of it, and basically where they like have this contest to see who's the strongest, etc. They have like yearly strongman competitions. They have them all over Scotland, called the Highland Games. And in Ireland, you have Celtic Games. Logs. And I've actually participated. I've been in the Highland Games several times.
Have you?
I wanted to.
What kind of events?
Well, my best event was trunk throwing. You have to like this big tree trunk. You lift it up and you try to throw it as far as possible. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like spear chucking, except you're lifting a tree.
Yeah.
And you're rock throwing and all kinds of stuff. It's basically just your basic strongman. But I did the best in the year that the rain was so bad, so horribly bad, that even the Scots stayed in the tent to get drunk on beer.
Yeah.
So I was outside with a couple of Danes and a couple of Swedes and I think an Italian. And so we were doing well. And we were doing so well that at some point, some drunk Scottish people came outside. I was like, what's this? And then they busted it down to 7th, 8th, and 9th place.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Well, because I'm not a big guy. I'm like 180 pounds. So they would put me with the dwarves anyway.
Yeah.
Because, it's a big man's game. Those guys are like 300 pounds. So they would just look at me like a little runt like you go play with the dwarves, which was great because I made great friends with men of small stature.
Against guys that look like lumberjacks.
Exactly. Dwarf tossing is a thing in Scotland. It's an actual sport. So the guys
you didn't get tossed, did you?
Yeah, I did. The guys I competed with, they press ganged me. They was like, yeah, you have to throw me. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll throw you. It's a prestige thing. You win some big prizes when you get tossed the furthest. So you're in the bar and the guys got these harnesses and you just toss them. And so we won a barrel of beer.
Nice.
Yeah, we won a barrel of beer.
That's a great prize.
I made a lot of friends because of that.
Yeah.
Which is great because you really want to be friends with Scottish people because they will beat the shit out of you. I kid you not. Those guys love to fight.
I can imagine.
Yes, I'm going to include Evil Scotsman at the end of this episode. I think I played you the clip.
Yeah, you did.
That's realistic.
You sent it to me, yeah?
That's the Scottish people. Scottish guys, when they get drunk, they brag about the size of their genitals. They want to beat your face in. They don't like English. They don't like you.
You're really increasing my desire.
And the only other Scottish people they like are in their clan.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, which brings us back to Braveheart. The hero dies at the end. Mm-hmm. And that's not normal Hollywood stuff. Because a Hollywood movie celebrates the hero and he rides into the sunset. Wallace dies, and he dies brutally. They do execute him. So this is like a kind of a downer ending. As an American, does that bother you?
It's a little bit of a bummer because you want to see him. True American movie would have Longshanks die at his hand
in a one-on-one fair fight.
I think, that would be like the action movie if they went in like an action movie way. But as unrealistic as this movie is, I think it would have been more so if he lived, because William Wallace is a great patriotic character that fought for what he believed in. But I think he had to die to make sure like his legacy endured. He was a savage. He even admits to it that he was
in Latin, in fact.
Yeah. He learned Latin from Uncle Argyle. So I think it was necessary for him to die, though. It was a bummer. It was like seeing him kill Longshanks would have been like the ultimate satisfying conclusion.
They actually filmed the way he actually died, edited this after viewing it for a test audience, where people left because it was just too gory and too brutal to watch. Those the punishments meted out to him were the punishments he was condemned for. Mm-hmm. They hung him. It's not like a lynching where you're dropped down and your neck breaks and you don't choke, but you just have a broken neck. No, they hung him, so he almost chokes. Then they quarter him. Yeah, you see that happening in the movie. He's lifted up, and it is shown as a kind of a trial by fire, which was a classic medieval way of, in the Middle Ages, you would prove your veracity. You would prove that what you were saying was true by suffering pain. You proved it. It's like, I can withstand any torture because my words are true.
Yeah, what did the guy call it? Purification or something?
Exactly. They disembowel him. They cut his stomach open. They cut his guts out, and they cut his dick off, and they show it to him. They also cut his heart out and show this to him. And this is all symbolic because it's a public execution, and it's to show the English people, look, we got this Scottish guy. Well, they
had to make an example of him to discourage anybody else from trying to pull something like this in the future.
And the Scottish people as well, because like parts of his body, his head, his heart, etc., were sent to various parts of Britain, kind of as a showcase. Like, look, we have Wallace. No, you don't have to have nightmares about him anymore. He won't come to burn your homestead, because that was what he did. That was Wallace's hobby for about better part of 7 years. They didn't hunt him down for nothing. He hated British. He hated the English. He loved burning. Yeah. One of the things I read about him was like he always smelled like smoke.
Yeah.
I read burned that too. Places down.
Burnt everything.
He was a pyromaniac. And they did it in the customary medieval way. Justice was served.
I mean, the movie is brutal as it is, but
it is.
I can't imagine them showing a disembowelment right there. But an interesting thing that I never caught before, that I caught on this watching, when Isabella went to see him in his cell before the torture.
Yes.
He said that, if he dulls his senses or if he wails, then, essentially Longshanks would win. And you notice during his whole torture, he doesn't scream. He doesn't do anything except like gasp a couple of times and like make the facial emotions until he screams freedom. That's the
I'm guessing he took the painkiller.
That's because I couldn't imagine like being able to stifle screams and stuff if you're getting disemboweled and your dick cut off. And
you scream your lungs out.
What else we got here?
Oh, we got plenty. What's your favorite scene?
Oh man, I can't pinpoint like one scene specifically, but I loved anything involving Stephen the Irishman. That dude is hilarious. The most quotable lines of the whole movie.
Oh, he gets all the good lines.
Yeah, he's funny, man. And he's just like he's a character. Yeah. So really anything like you mentioned a hunting scene before, and that's one of my favorites too, because at that time, I don't know what the relationship between Scotland and Ireland was, but you were leery of this guy. You didn't know. He just comes out of nowhere and says, "So I get to kill Englishmen. I want to fight for you." And he's talking to, the Lord Almighty. So they think he's a whack-a-job. But then in that hunting scene, it turns out he saves William Wallace's ass from getting killed by another
by a guy who seems completely trustworthy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So
that's and my other favorite line is they tell him, "You're a madman." And he's like, "Oh, I've come to the right place then, huh?"
Yeah.
And then they start laughing because they know they're all nuts. This is crazy. They're all going to die.
They're all like-minded. Yeah.
Yeah. We're all going to die. We're just having fun out here.
But yeah.
In the mountains, we left our wives at home. We can do what we want. Yeah. Same in the shield wall when it's raining arrows. Wallace's shield is pierced with an arrow. And he just tells Wallace like, well, the Almighty tells me he can get me out of this mess, but he's pretty sure you're fucked.
Yep. That was the one I had in mind. That's one of my favorite lines.
First time I ever saw Braveheart, I was in Paris. This was really fun because the entire movie was dubbed in French. And I kind of got the sense that the French audience was just there to see the actress who plays the Princess of Wales, Isabel, called Sophie Marceau. There would be this collective male grunt whenever she was on screen.
Really?
Yeah, this grunt of approval.
Was she that?
Well, in French movies, she's a very hot actress. I mean, she was a Bond girl in one of the Bond movies. France has a very large movie industry. They make movies just for France, and they're very successful, and they make a lot of money, but they rarely get exported. But I saw a lot of them when I go to Paris just for fun. So at some point, I watched Braveheart in French with a French audience who would grunt at Sophie Marceau and grumble when she wasn't in the scene. And they would just sort of tolerate Braveheart. And they liked Braveheart simply because the Scottish were beating the English.
No kidding.
Really. I went with a bunch of friends, and afterwards they were like celebrating that. It's like, did you see how many British guys got killed?
That's funny.
Yeah. And then I didn't see Braveheart again until it came out on video. And then that's when I actually heard the English soundtrack. And I was like, oh, they're all speaking Scottish in a Scottish accent. That's cute.
That's cute.
Yeah. So the first time I heard Wallace's riveting speech was in French.
Oh, man.
With no subtitling.
Yeah.
So I just sort of guessed what they were saying.
Oh, geez.
It was great.
Well, at least the visuals are pleasing enough where you got to see a bunch of badass battle scenes.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing. And that's actually a question I want to pose. How did Braveheart win so many Oscars? How did that happen? Because movies like that don't win Oscars. How does this happen?
And that year, if I'm not mistaken, was it went up against Apollo 13?
A busy year. It was a busy year. They actually beat people for it.
Yeah. Yeah, like serious movies.
Apollo 13.
Yeah, which I mean, in its own right, I don't know how Braveheart cleaned up the way it did. I mean, cinematography, I get like that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's so well shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And you can tell it's all wide lens, and they're very smart about it. Mel shoots all the actresses with a soft lens, so it kind of looks like Bold and the Beautiful. Did you notice?
No, I didn't. But
okay, when you watch it again, and you will, because it's the most rewatchable movie ever. Whenever he shoots Murren or he shoots Isabel, it's a soft lens, and they look like even better.
Like they got a glow to them, huh? Yeah.
It's like they use slow motion a lot, especially in the battle scenes. That makes it really tense. They zoom in on a face, and it just builds tension. It's incredible.
Yeah, battle scenes of this scope, I don't think I've ever seen.
Is there another movie before Braveheart that does battle scenes this well?
No.
I mean, the exception maybe of Spartacus. Because you can see a lot of Spartacus in Braveheart.
Yeah.
Of course, because it's a Kubrick movie, and Kubrick is the greatest director of all time. But
maybe not to the scope as Braveheart, because Braveheart had, like you said, 2,000 soldiers on a battlefield at once, just running full sprint towards one another, meeting in the middle.
200 horses.
Yeah, I don't. So even the best battle scenes you've ever seen were not on the scope that Braveheart was.
Yeah, and there were movies during that era where you would expect that kind of thing, but didn't get it.
Right.
Like I would expect that from a Dances with Wolves.
Sure.
Or it just hadn't been done. And when you basically look at the movie from that point of view, it's like, how did they even manage? And they probably managed it simply because they didn't know what they were getting into.
Yeah.
I think if you'd have like a famous director trying to do this, the movie would be 20 times more expensive. I think Mel Gibson just sort of accidentally made one of the greatest battle movies of all time.
Yeah. Just to attempt it took balls of solid rock.
Yeah. Just on sheer will. We'll just figure it out, and we'll just find a way. And he lucked out with a good team. From what he said about it in interviews, he was completely wiped out after that movie.
Yeah, I can imagine, just from directing, because he did all the in front of the camera stuff in like the matter of a couple of weeks, and everything else he did, directing wise.
Yeah, and that shoot escalated completely. I mean, it was like an Apocalypse Now, where it would just, they just add weeks and weeks to it, and it just got more and more expensive. There's like this great quote from one of the producers who said, well, okay, we can feed you guys steak every day. You can just sort of eat nothing, and then we have a movie.
Well, I mean, it paid off. Whatever sacrifices they made, it paid off in the end. Because boy, what the finished product was.
Yeah, it looks incredible.
Yeah,
it does.
Sure.
And I mean, they get like best director, best picture, best cinematography, best effects, best sound editing, best makeup. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah. And the heavy hitters that year, well, the ones up for Best Picture were Braveheart, Apollo 13, Babe, Il Postino,
Yeah.
and Sense and Sensibility.
If you look at Mel Gibson as a director, after Braveheart, he hasn't shied away from stuff like that. Have you seen Apocalypto?
No, no, I
Worth
haven't.
watching, because it has that Braveheart kind of sensibility.
Yeah, I've heard such amazing things about it, and I've been wanting to watch it for years. I just haven't gotten around to it. But yeah, that's
same with Hacksaw Ridge. It has that Braveheart battlefield.
Yeah, and especially after something like this, that after getting a taste of it, you think like that exhausted me for months and months and months. I'm not going to do another one of those. He just keeps jumping right back in the ring.
I think it gave him a confidence as a director that he could pull it off. And of course, he has his own production company, so he can set his own boundaries.
Right. I'm glad he's doing good despite the scandals and everything.
Yeah, the scandals. That's the first thing Ryan asked. Why would you do Mel? Why not? Can I do him justice? I'm not so sure, because he's a brilliant and underrated man. And he's also a very complex dude. A lot of directors are crazy. A lot of them. If you look throughout the ages, those are very strange artistic people.
Yeah.
They all have their skeletons in the closet.
Who's the Citizen Kane guy? He was a nut job too, wasn't he?
Oh, definitely. Citizen Kane, Orson Welles.
Orwell? Oh, Orson Welles. I was going to say Orwell, but I'm like, no, not that. Yeah, Orson Welles. Yeah.
Another force of nature.
Yeah. Stanley Kubrick, Alfred Hitchcock. They're all batshit crazy.
Batshit.
Those right there were, including Mel,
Sam
for the greatest, some of the greatest directors that ever lived.
Mel just got unlucky, or maybe he just had enemies because he's outside of the system. Whereas most of the directors you mentioned worked from within the system. Their weaknesses and their problems aren't magnified because that's not in anyone's best interest. Whereas taking Mel down a peg, it's probably served a purpose. I think the reality is he's one of the first guys saying shit like that caught on camera, where you can't say anything anymore because someone's always filming something. Whereas all those directors from yesteryear, if they say anything at a party or wherever, that stuff would just get buried.
Yeah. Never unpublished. Spoken of again. Yeah.
Never spoken of again, etc.
Well, the 4-hour cut, there's a 4-hour cut of this movie that exists.
Really? I've never seen it.
Because it was never released. Gibson has stated that he's all about releasing it if Paramount and Fox are interested, but it's never really been discussed. So I would love to see the stuff that was cut out.
Oh, knowing Mel, he put all the torture stuff back in.
Oh, I'm sure he did.
Well, that and all those battle scenes where you have people cleaving each other's arms and heads off.
Yeah. Well, that gore
had never been done before in that way. Sure, in a horror movie, but not in a mainstream Hollywood movie with pretty actresses.
Right.
He would just chop someone's arm off like it was nothing.
It was convincing. Horror movies, you could tell there's like a clay model that they use, to cut the arm off or whatever. This was so convincing.
Horror movies are typically low budget.
Yeah, low budget
and
stuff. Yeah.
It's something a starting filmmaker can just sink his teeth into, and people are forgiving of the bad optical effects,
right?
Because they're they just want a scary movie. Whereas this is depicting actual bloodletting, people killing each other in pitched battle. Now you can argue about what they're exactly showing and if that's realistic. Because I practice historical European martial arts. So a lot of people I practice with are highly critical of a lot of stuff in the battle scenes. Then again, does it matter? It's about storytelling.
Sure, yeah.
In reality, there would have been more discipline. They wouldn't have been running at each other with drawn swords. I don't know if you've ever held a sword, but it's not smart to run with something like that. If you trip...
My whole life. Like,
if you trip,
don't run
you
with
fall
scissors.
into your own sword, or
Yeah,
worse,
yeah.
you hurt other people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not a good military situation to be in.
I can't imagine it would be.
Yeah, that and swords are basically a last resort. Your first weapon of choice would be a spear to keep whoever is attacking you at bay, and try to hurt him with that. And if he's harnessed, you would have blunting weapons to numb him, so you could get at him. And the people would wear armor was for that particular reason, so you could withstand beatings with blunt forced weapons. Because most of the people on the battle, they would be conscripted and would just use whatever they were used to fighting with, and that usually would just be agricultural tools.
Yeah.
That's why if you look at the stuff they were fighting with, either looked like or were actual agricultural tools, scythes and switches and stuff like that, things you harvest with. Whether you're harvesting grass or chopping people's heads off, amounts to the same thing, and you have the muscularity and the dexterity to wield it. Yeah,
it might be nitpicking, but another anachronistic part of this that I read was that those long broadswords that they use probably wouldn't be accurate for this time frame.
Definitely not.
Of a shorter dagger and a shield, but
absolutely, double wielding swords were mostly Italian.
Oh yeah.
And
where you need two
they're
hands
used
to wield them.
To dislodge people from horses, and especially people in harness, because that's what a sword is useful for, because you can get into the seams of the harness. This guy in harness is like a tank. There's nothing you can do to him. He just wades right through you. Once you get him down with a bunch of guys, then you can go to work on him. A couple of guys will just use hammers to just dent his armor so he stays down. And then there's just this one guy with a dagger or with a sword or what have you. He gets in between the plates and starts wriggling the sword in so they can like maim him or put him out of commission one way or the other. It's very close combat. It's brutal. It's horrible. Most of those people wouldn't survive one battle, let alone several.
I can imagine.
And surviving those battles is really a matter of the quality of your armor. You see that in like 300, the mother telling her son, come back with your shield or upon it, which was a Spartan axiom, because that shield was valuable. That shield was an heirloom, and that shield is more important than you are. You're replaceable. That shield is a different story. We'd have to like redo it. I have to like pay a lot of money for a smith to make a new shield, and it's probably emblems on it from the family. It's like
family
your children and your grandchildren need that shield, so come back with that shield or upon it. Right. Just don't pawn that off to pay some harlot.
Yeah, back in those days,
that's one of the things you want.
Yeah,
whores.
New lease,
celebrate life, right?
Yeah. All right. It always comes full circle.
When you visit Scotland, and you will, because Scotland is one of those places in the world you just have to visit because it's that awesome. Countries with great culture are always countries with great booze.
On the list, man. You're really making an argument for Scotland. I'm gonna have to get there.
I remember I was like in my early 20s, and I was going east to west. I had a tent, I had a sleeping bag. Most of it was rainproof. That didn't stop it from getting me soaked to the bone. I basically just hiked across Scotland, going from glen to glen, going from inn to inn. It's a great time. You can actually also go across England, which is also a fun thing to do. I've done that. Great hiking trails. It's hiking country.
Wow.
Ireland, same thing. When you get into these Scottish villages, you get into these funny conversations. On the British Isles, everybody's into gardening. So everybody's really proud of their garden. And the Scottish are proud of their garden in a really different way. Do you like my garden? And it's like, yes, sir, it's very nice. It's always good to be polite to Scottish people. You never know if they beat the shit out of you. Well, I have a secret. Oh, what's your secret, sir? What's your secret to your nice garden? He's like, yes, well, I put whiskey on it, you see. It's like, really, whiskey? Wow. Isn't that really expensive? Oh, no, I drink it first.
Oh, man, that's nice.
Classic Scottish joke.
I
fell for it.
Yeah. Oh, man. That's the way to water the garden.
Isn't it? Doug.
Yeah.
The Rocky Minute.
Yeah, that's my podcast.
Are you the most voracious podcaster on the network? Because people sleep on how many episodes you've done.
Yeah, I have by far the most episodes. But it's The first couple of seasons, we were really ripping through it. We were doing 5 episodes a week, Monday through Friday, 1 minute of film at a time. We analyzed and we put it out. Season 3 has been considerably slower. I had a few, aside from the worldwide pandemic, I got divorced and everything in my personal life was in chaos. So
did Rocky Minute kill your marriage?
Some argue that it did. It was a variety of things, I would say. Yeah. I'm happily engaged once again to be married, and we are releasing episodes of Rocky 3, our coverage of Rocky 3 as we speak. So it's not at the pace that we were doing them before, but we're gonna get through it. I promise. Stick with us.
Oh, I'm sticking. It's like Rocky. No, it's really Rocky Minute is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to, and it's kind of it's my pre-workout. I always listen to Rocky Minute before I work out. It has the feel of like watching Rocky, and then you work out.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that. We're loyal listeners like yourself. We certainly appreciate your support.
Well, I think they're fantastic.
Yeah, we're featured on the Last of the Action Heroes Network, along with all those other great podcasts, and yourself now. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
And welcome.
If you're looking for trouble, you're in the right place. Don't look at me like that, or I'll headbutt your face. I'm a mean motherfucker, I was born that way. And just because I wear a skirt, don't think I'm fucking gay, 'cause I'm an evil Scotsman, and Jimmy is my name. I'm a sheepshagger from Aberdeen, and causing pain is my game. I don't care where you come from, if you're big or you're small. I fought the best, and I beat them all. If you're English or Irish, you won't have to die. But if you are a German, you can kiss your ass goodbye. I'm an evil Scotsman, and Jock is my name. If you don't like the rules, don't play the fucking game. Yes, I'm an evil Scotsman. My name is Jock, and the girls are just dying for a portion of my 10-inch cock. Oh yeah. Fucker. Wankers. No beds. Thank you.